default Grub file. We changed the default timeout setting, and we changed the default operating system. Because of that, and we've enumerated any new operating systems we may have added.
Remember, whenever you modify Grub2's configuration files, you must compile the changes into boot grub cfg with the command update grub.
Anytime I modify those files and things, I need to basically do the equivalent of makefile. But grub2 style, that would be sudo, and I need to do update grub. So sudo update grub, and notice that says generating the grub config file. So it's going to write all of this. It'll collect all of the information that's changed in any of the scripts I modified or edited, any of the things that have been updated, and it'll put them into the grub cfg file in the /boot/grub folder. And again, although you could edit this file directly, you're not supposed to. Though rather you should edit the files in the etc grub.d subdirectory or in the etc default grub file. Okay, so let's give it a test. That being done, okay, and back at the boot menu, now notice that the default operating system that's highlighted is Windows 7, whereas before it was Ubuntu. And again, I'll just go over those index values. If I were to look at the default setting, this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, respectively. So if you take a look at your boot menu, if you're doing a multi-boot or triple boot, or even a crazy quadruple boot, you can figure out how to set the default operating system and partition based on the order that they appear in the Grub2 boot menu. Once again, taking a look at the configuration file, this is the default operating system on a multi-boot system that will be selected first or by default if the user doesn't change it or do anything. So remember, we changed that from Ubuntu to Windows 7. Now I'm going to change it back to Ubuntu. Another thing that you can do if you add this entry, grub, and save default, then it will simply pick the last, let me pull out the extra D there, it'll simply pick the last operating system that the user selected when they booted up off that menu, if it's set to true. So that way, without having to modify the configuration file, you could temporarily make it boot into Ubuntu or Windows 7 or Snow Leopard if there were some tasks or things that you had to do repetitively that involved rebooting those things. So it's kind of a nice option that we could add there. Grub save default, but I'm going to stick with the default configuration file because that's not in there, at least in this section by default. But if you want to add it, yes, that's up to you. The timeout, I'm going to change it to 20 seconds. It was 10, we made it 30, now I'm going to decrease it back to 20. Now the distributor, that's, in this case, what will be displayed, the descriptive name in the menu entry. And in this case, it's just going to be Debian. It's just echoing Debian. Now the next one, Quiet Splash. For a black screen with boot processes displayed in text, we could remove this. Okay, and if that's what we wanted, to see the Grub splash image and plus condensed text output, I could just use splash. All right, instead of quiet splash, and we'll modify that. We're just going to make that splash. And then also, like for instance, when I was setting up my EverX laptop with Ubuntu, I had to turn off ACPI and the card reader and a couple of other options. It was an old EverX laptop, so that I could pass those options in if I needed to. I'm just trying to get ourselves familiar with Grub2. What are the changes? What's new? What's the structure? Where are the configuration files and how do they link together? So now I'm looking at this file is written by all of the other script files that we have looked at previously. Okay, and that's when we use the command update grub. So all that information gets compiled into this file. So here you have the color scheme, and if I go down here, here's the memory test menu option, and there's the kernel and what's being displayed there. And then if I keep going down, notice here's a menu entry. And this is, from that configuration file, 30OS Prober, it added OS 10, 32-bit, as a menu entry. And then again, it adds OS 10, 64-bit as a menu entry. And I'll scroll down some more, and now down here it adds Windows 7 as a menu entry. And I could create splash images. In this case, I set it up to user default. There's also sort of a default package out there that you can install with Grub2 splash images. So I'm just going to apt-get that right now. Sudo apt-get install and Grub2 splash images. Okay, and now that that's installed by default, I'm going to use Nautilus real quick. Just try to view some of these images. But they would be located by default with that package installed in the directory user and share and images and grub. Okay, and again, we'll just kind of cycle through some of these in image viewer. So these are just some of the grub menu, bootloader graphics that you can put on your Grub2 menu. I'm going to go with this one, Moraine Lake. And in order to do that, I need to modify the configuration file. Do you remember which one it was? In this case, the Debian theme configuration file. So I'm going to do Alt F2, and I'm just going to select again GK sudo gedit. And I'm going to go into the file system, etc. I'm going to go into do grub D, and here this 5 Debian theme is the one I want to open up and edit. Lake underscore, and it was TGA, and just double check, make sure it's got to be able to find the path. So user share images, and it was grub. User share images grub. Okay, that should be good there. Alright, so I'm going to save that file, and this will be sort of our custom image. And again, remember, whenever I do this, kind of like, you have to restart daemons whenever you modify config files for Samba or FTP or Apache. But in this case, I need to update grub. So it's going to be sudo and update grub. And just to write those changes to my configuration files. And let's reboot and look at our spiffy new menu. And here's our beautiful, albeit now difficult to read, new Grub2 boot menu with our background. So I'll just kind of let you spiffy things up if you so desire. Say I want to change my wallpaper again. That looks a little convoluted. I want to replace this file, the current splash image, with another splash image. Plasma-lamp.tga. Okay, and then the other thing I want to change is my color scheme. I'm going to do white text on a black background, and then for highlighting, I'm going to do red on white. Just to kind of maybe give that theme some contrast there. Remember, whenever you update a file, you have to update grub. So let me zoom in here. And I'm just going to say sudo update grub and for my password for root privileges, and it'll just take all those config files and sort of make file or compile them into the boot grub, grub CFG file.